All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. We'll continue to let people in as they join. Thank you all for logging in today for our third session of the 2024 Seoul and Cal Board of Governors exam prep. Today we'll be covering quality and performance management as well as finance, and we have two guest subject matter experts today who will be presenting those topics. Appreciate their time today to be able to go over the questions with all of us. So I'll skip ahead to a couple of the parking lot items and then we'll dig right into the actual topics. This is a link to Ethics and Professionalism for Healthcare Managers, second edition. This book covers the topic that we covered last week in our second session. It's just a book that kind of goes over more in depth for ethics and professionalism within healthcare. Thank you, Nora, for sending this over, and this will be included on the after session email that I send out.
So the key is for all the flashcards in the study set, they all reference this book. Actually, it was like the first edition, and so now they have the second. So between that, whether you choose to select that or not, but also one of the best places to get a sense of the professionalism and ethics of the ACHE is going through all their newsletters, their publications, their monthly magazines. It's also very useful.
Awesome. I just want to highlight this upcoming Cal event happening next Tuesday, May 14th from 5:30 to 7. If you're looking for ACHE virtual interactive education credits, which some of you who are getting ready to apply, as well as those of us who are getting ready to recertify, this is a great way to earn those credits and also get to see a great interactive session being presented by Cal. So this is about developing high performance teams. Delmar Smith, who's a member of our board, I believe Delmar's also on taking this this Board of Governors session with us, but I don't see him on just yet. He is going to be the moderator, so it'll be some great panelists. If you're looking for some education credits, this will be a great one to attend next Tuesday. And I've included the link in here if you want to go ahead and click on it and purchase tickets. So today we're lucky enough to have Navi Atwal with us. She is first and foremost our board secretary, so I want to highlight that. Thank you, Navi, for all that you do for the Cal board. She's a managerial consultant with Kaiser Permanente. She's also a lecturer with Cal State University Chico and received the ACHE Early Careerist Award a couple years back. So we're excited to have her here to go over the quality management and performance management topic today. Navi, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Ryan. And before I get started, I just want to really quickly put a link in the chat for everyone. This is a link to the SPATH textbook that I use in the class, and it covers much of the content that we'll go through today. I know that maybe Nora or Rick, you have shared the links to other textbooks and other materials that folks can utilize, but I find this textbook to be really important and sort of in line with all the topics that we're going to go through today. So I'll dive in and just briefly cover each of the topics before we go to the Q&A, or excuse me, not the Q&A, the practice questions, starting with benchmarking. So when it comes to benchmarking, I really think about it as a action of the organization to assess performance, to understand where the organization sits compared to the competitors in the marketplace. So it's really about understanding what are the ways that we can assess our performance, the tools, the techniques that we can utilize to where we are standing today, and then how are we doing in terms of our competition. In the past, I know Stan has recommended this, and I agree with the recommendation, is given just your time and availability in preparing for the exam, a good place to start is at the federal level, is to start with the CMS value-based purchasing guidelines and and how those are composed to really understand how organizations go about collecting the data and submitting the data. So that's a great place to start. Going on to principles and methods of medical staff peer review. Um, just knowing that this is a condition of participation from the Joint Commission to have an organized medical staff and to conduct a medical staff peer review. When I think about this, I really think about it from the basis of for quality, that it really comes down to your board is not going to have all of the information to assess the performance of your medical staff. So there has to be some sort of committee, some sort of group that can do that for on behalf of the board, and ensure that the care that's provided in the organization is high quality care. And there's some sort of bylaws that can help to accomplish that task. So again, this gets highlighted really well in the textbook. So if you have an opportunity, really recommend the textbook. Knowledge of risk management principles and programs. The goal here is to really safeguard the organization and prevent any sort of exposure of risks that can turn into financial losses. So if that's all of the practices, all the actions the organization can take to limit the amount of risk and limit the amount of exposure to not have that turn into financial losses. The textbook, again, I can't say that enough, covers this really well. The next section around managerial performance and process improvement tools. When I think about managerial performance and process improvement, really there's two things that come to mind. The first being Lean and the second being Six Sigma. And I think a lot of folks in healthcare are probably familiar with either or both of those. So when we're thinking about Lean, we're really looking at it from the perspective of waste reduction. So there's sort of 8 types of waste that Lean highlights, and the goal is to reduce those types of waste in the organization. And then Six Sigma, again, tries to accomplish a similar task of having the best processes that can develop a good product, but takes a slightly different approach, which is to reduce variation in a process, and it takes a bit of a statistical approach in doing so. So here I would recommend just kind of learning the two major process improvement approaches. There's others, but Lean and Six Sigma are the two that most folks are familiar with, and to understand what makes each of those distinct from one another. And really, again, the mindset here is that we're working to enhance our processes, enhance our workflows, to reduce waste, to reduce variation so that we can get the best product out there. And sort of my biased opinion in teaching the course and kind of working the quality space is that the better your product is, the better your service is, the more ability that you have to gain sort of market share. That quality of care is becoming more and more important for the consumer and can help to translate in getting more of that market share, more of the consumer drawn to your organization. Utilization review and case management system. There's a entire chapter in that textbook, comes in the later stages of that textbook, that highlights sort of assessment, utilization management, both from like the hospital perspective, the health plan, and then any federally funded programs like a long-term care facility. Utilization management and utilization review sort of in falling under the measurement and assessment category of 3 of the basic quality management activities. So again, the textbook kind of covers what those are, and kind of breaks down quality into these 3 basic categories of work. For those of you that are familiar with utilization management or utilization review, just being familiar that this is part of requirements, and to, there's typically a committee or a group of people that are working in the hospital to review admissions, a necessity of care, reducing unnecessary services. Again, this textbook does a really great job of kind of distinguishing between what are the health plan, a hospital, activities and what's required and what's recommended. I'll go on to the next slide. Knowledge of clinical performance and process improvement tools and techniques, clinical pathways, evidence-based medicine, population health, pay for performance. So just being familiar that a lot of these require sort of a really good understanding of how can what's being done as sort of a best practice in other organizations or other places be translated into your organization. Outside of these, what you might not get covered when you're looking up into each of these categories or each of these suggestions is the actual tools that can help you do your job. So going back to the process improvement tools, that's going to be things like, your A3s, your fishbone diagram, your root cause analysis. So those are the tools that can help you achieve these um, uh, best practices and particularly around translating them from outside of the organization to internal. Knowledge of quality and performance measurement tools, particularly the HCAP survey. So just being aware that the surveys, there's a lot of different types of surveys. The HCAP survey is for the hospital setting, so that's going to come out to anyone who's at least had a one night of hospital inpatient stay over the age of 18, and a lot of the information, or in fact, all of the information that comes out of that survey is available on the Medicare Compare website. So it's a way for the consumer to understand the quality of your service, quality of your product, but also a way for the consumer to sort of shop around. So it's important that as an organization, your consumer has available to them. So if there is an opportunity to be elective around their care, the consumer can shop around through tools like the CMS Compare website. But internally, for your staff to know things like communication, particularly when it comes to like discharge planning, even the level of noise at night, and comfort of care for that patient, can translate to the patient's experience in getting that care. Knowledge of tools improving safety, reducing avoidable errors, disclosure of errors. There's a whole chapter that covers that, but just to give you a little bit of context from sort of a historical perspective, this became patient safety and avoiding errors. I think a lot of folks are familiar with is the 1999 report To Err is Human, and how much sort of preventable errors were occurring in healthcare. But just to kind of build upon that, the AHRQ sort of started tracking measures for healthcare safety in 2003, formed a small committee, and then started to report out on those in 2005. So these include everything from adverse drug use, bloodstream infections. So really became important for the hospitals to track and have their own safety programs, and to do as much as they could in their environment, in their preparation, in their service to reduce, create an environment to reduce any potential errors. And the one thing I also want to mention is typically, when we're thinking about errors, we're not coming from the perspective of, the individual doesn't know how to do their job. We're typically focused on what in the system is promoting or guiding the individual to make an error. So just being mindful of that, because oftentimes when an error happens, it's very easy to point fingers, but there's typically sort of larger underneath the surface systematic issues that are causing folks to make errors. The last piece around recognition of quality as a strategic initiative. Again, just from my sort of biased opinion, I think of quality as a very key distinct advantage for healthcare organizations. we're in a very competitive environment. I think organizations are really working hard to pursue sort of excellence in quality, going after things like the Baldrige National Quality Program or the Baldrige Award. It's whatever the organization can from the competitors, make itself distinct for the consumer, um, to be able to have, again, more of that market share. I am going through these very quickly, but I'll take a pause here, see if there's any questions. Otherwise, I'm happy to jump into the practice questions. Let's see, look at the chat here. All right, Ryan, I'm not seeing any questions, and I'm happy to answer anything. If you can find me on LinkedIn or if you want to email me, I'm happy to dive into anything with anyone, answer any questions. I know we're going through these pretty quickly, but I really assure you the textbook, if you're able to, again, borrow it, or if you can rent it or even purchase it, it's a really good investment because it does go through all of these knowledge criterias in a lot of detail, and it gives you a better understanding that might even influence your day-to-day. So Ryan, I'm happy to go through the first question. So I think a lot of you guys are familiar with Rick's way of thinking about these questions. So I will pause here and let folks answer the question in the chat, and then kind of go through my thinking, and I invite Ryan, Rick, Mary, Nora to chime in and see how they would answer the question as well. So critical paths are important because they...
I think the one that sticks out to me, excuse me, the most is B, just because we're looking at best practices and you're looking at critical paths to the best practice. Looks like we have somebody in the chat who agrees with that as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is one of the ones where you have to sort of know what critical paths are. And
Yes.
if you're not familiar with it, then you can try to do some elimination, at least improve your guessing. So I would say I would want to, if I didn't know this, and I don't, by the way, I don't know the answer. I would look for the broader one. Then C and D, well, C particularly looks really specific. D doesn't look real specific, but it's not, I don't know, I'm just not liking it as much as I like B. B almost is a definition, and without even knowing what critical paths are, I'm assuming it's got to be related to best practices. So again, I have not taken an obvious class. I have not read, I think I did read that book, but I'm just trying to figure it out by logic, and I would come down to B as my best guess, recognizing I'm guessing.
And that's perfectly okay, because I think, there's so many questions on the exam, and there's so many different sections to have to know. I think there's no way that you can know every single answer on the exam. So there has to be some good guessing involved. So similar to Rick, if I was going through the process of guessing this, the way I would think about it is, is there anything contrary in the actual question itself? The other way to say this is a question asking is a question that's being asked pretty straightforward, or is it trying to confuse me? Critical paths are important because that seems pretty straightforward. And if I don't know what critical paths are, I am jogging down in my memory to think about anything that could help me think about and narrow down my decision. I can, to Rick's point, provide support in malpractice suit. That sounds very detailed, and I don't know if I don't know what critical paths are, it's not going to help me to relate it to law in healthcare. When I think about increased patient throughput, throughput sounds like efficiency and best way to move patients through the hospital. Is it that? Critical path could be that. Reduce resource use, maybe, maybe not. So again, this is a little bit of guessing game where the best thing you can do is eliminate the options that you think are not going to work for your response. So Ryan, I'm seeing a lot of B's in the audience, or in the chat from the audience. Is it B? Let's see.
B it is.
B it is. Nora, do you want to share anything about how you would have approached this, or how you would have known what the correct answer is?
Well, this is a very simple but very important structure, how they structured this, because this is a clear example of when the broadest response tends to be the best. And again, right away, that is so very narrow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the first key. And then as you eliminate the rest, yeah, it may increase patient throughput because the critical path may be related to, something as simple as making sure that there's sterilized equipment that's part of that comes in. And it may reduce resource use because you're not wasting time and dates and supplies on something that is not included in that critical path. So all of these could be parts of it, but that's the broadest. And so this is a key example of when that's useful. And remember, we're not looking at just California or whatever states you're in, or countries like Okinawa, in Japan. This is again, the structure is important. Like you said, Navi, it's very clear cut. It's not trying to deceive you. It's not trying to trick you into anything. So that's why I like this question so much.
And absolutely right, Miriam. Best practices and protocols. The broadest answer fits here. So let's go on to the next one, Ryan. Again, read the question and see if it's very clear or if there's any potential for it to be confusing for you.
And remember, my favorite advice is to read questions backwards because there's a lot of adjectives in this.
Mm-hmm. If I was taking the exam, this would be a little bit confusing for me. I would have to read it a couple of times to make sure that I'm really understanding what the question is asking me to answer. So which characteristic of a high risk process would tend to increase the risk of a process failure? So it's very easy to know, coming from sort of Lean and Six Sigma, that typically we're associating process improvement and with the word decrease. So this is asking for the opposite. So I'm seeing a lot of C's in the chat. Let's go through and kind of see how we would answer this. So knowing that this is more of a tricky question, it's asking sort of for the flip response of what would cause a process to fail. Simplicity, the more the simple decrease the risk of a failure. So I can immediately eliminate that. Consistency, well, if it's a consistent process and everyone's following it, that should also lead to less failures. So I can get rid of that. Variability, well, we know that variability in a process can exist because there's always sort of a upper and a lower limit to variability in a process, and it's natural and expected for there to be variability in a process. But if it maybe falls outside of that control limit, then it could be potentially threatening to the process and cause failure. So I'll leave that alone for now and go to the last one. Automation. Automation, well, if the process is automated and there's not sort of maybe a human involved, that could cause there to be a risk or cause there to be a failure to the process, then it shouldn't fail. So I'm between C and D, but leaning more towards C. So I'm with everyone in the chat. I would say variability. C.
Let's see what it is.
Yeah. So any advice from Nora, Rick?
I have a question for you. I mean, isn't this basically Six Sigma?
It is. Yeah, Six Sigma looks to bring the process as close to, standard as possible, reduce any outliers and
Reduce
variability.
variability.
Yeah.
So if you know Six Sigma principles, then you would have had this question.
Yeah. And again, it's two pieces here. It's knowing that the question is a little bit tricky. So it's kind of you have to flip your thinking, which can be hard in a test environment, but just taking it slow, reading it through, making sure you understand what exactly the question is asking you to answer, and then going through going through all of the options one by one to saying, is that what the question is asking for? And then once you know that that is not an option or that's not the right option, you can eliminate it. So it's not a contender for answers. I Ryan and Rick and Nora, unfortunately have to hop off. I'm again happy to answer questions if anyone has any other questions, but I'm wondering if you would like to pick up and continue on with the quality section here.
We'll try. You're a hard act to follow. But we'll do our best. Thank you.
Thank you. I again really appreciate this opportunity and I apologize for having to hop off early, but best of luck to everyone.
Thank you, Navi.
Thank you, Navi.
Thank you.
All right.
I'm going to take this opportunity to just bring up quickly one of my favorite books. And I don't know if you've ever read this one, and it applies to more than just healthcare, but if you're not familiar with The Invisible Gorilla, I highly recommend. It helps me in so many different areas of life. Invisible Gorilla. If you haven't heard of it, you've got to read it.
And if you don't want to read the book, just find the YouTube video of
Yeah.
doing the experiment, and that gives you the answer right there. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's a good source. Nora.
All
Well, I'll
right.
take a shot at number 3 if you want. We can take turns.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's go for it.
So again, quality is not my area. When I was taking the exam, it was one of the areas that I actually focused by studying on, because I know I've never had a full class in it. It's not my strong point, so I had to work at it. After I took the exam, I managed to forget everything I knew. So bear with me here. Okay, so in conducting a risk assessment, all right, so I'm doing risk assessment. Okay, that I can kind of relate to that because I do disaster risk assessment stuff, so that's fine. Okay, what's the first action? So first action is the same thing as what's the most important. It's going to say not just what's part of it, but what's the real important part. So identify the steps in the process. I don't know that steps is really my first point. Identify what could fail. Oh, well, maybe I don't know what the failure is until after the steps. So maybe I eliminated steps too soon. Identify causes of failure in the process. Well, wait a minute. So all right, this is actually going in order. I'm getting confused here. So identify the steps, then identify the failure, then identify the cause of failure. All of those are actually in order. And then identify priorities. Well, you can't identify the priorities until you identify the causes. So actually steps is the first one. That's the first thing you have to do, I guess, is really identify your process. So I was trying to eliminate A right at the beginning, and if I had, I'd been wrong because I think A is the right answer.
Looks like everyone in the chat's agreeing. Let's see. It is.
And again, I think the strength in this question is to read all the answers. Because here he was ready to eliminate something, but until he read, the other options. So very, very important. Don't just rush into answering it.
Who would like to take number 4? Any volunteers?
You go, Ryan.
All right. So in designing a risk management program for your organization, what approach would have the most impact on reducing risk? So what this tells me is I'm looking for something that would have, just what that last statement says is reducing risk. And if we look at, Nora's way of reading it backwards, what risk reducing impact would have the best, what approach would be the best? I'm trying to read it backwards. I'm getting confused. But that's basically what's calling out to me is how to reduce risk. So the first answer would be developing a reporting system for medical errors and injuries to staff and visitors. So that would tell us the different events that have happened, the errors, the injuries, but would that have the most impact on reducing risk? Because it's just telling us what is actually happening. It's not determining what caused those things. Require assessments of high-risk areas or processes within each service department and unit. So this would be more of an investigation in what could possibly happen within these areas, which could help reduce the overall risk. So that's something that's calling out to me with that question or with that answer. Use task forces to address key Joint Commission standards that apply to risk management. So that would do a broad job of, characterizing general risks that occur, I would think, but it may not necessarily be the best for my particular organization. It would be more of like a format to establish, like a structure to set up, I would think, versus taking a look at what's going on around. Educate staff on potential risks and patient safety practices. So if I'm looking to design a risk management program for the organization, what approach would have the most impact on reducing risk? So if we want to prevent something, would we want to educate people to understand what potential risks they may run into? So when I'm looking at it, I'm getting tied between B and D just because I'm looking at how I would reduce it. So if I educate staff on the potential risks of patient safety, it should help them with their job in approaching it. But if I'm also doing an assessment of high risk areas, I'm identifying the risks, but with B, am I actually implementing something that's going to prevent them? So in the chat, I'm seeing C and D. I think I'm going to go with D. Any other thoughts before I jump into this one? It was B. I was torn between the two of them. I think what I misread in the question is I'm designing it. I'm not necessarily implementing it. So this is just the design phase. What am I going to do in order to take a look at what risks are potentially within my department or my organization? So I think B is the right answer in that in that case because I neglected that in designing portion of it. The education comes after you've already identified and designed what the approach is going to be. So I see where my error was with that. An assessment identifies what we need to educate staff on exactly. That was a great statement.
Right. And I don't know if you believe us when Rick and I say we don't remember the answers, because we really don't. But again, here I was trying to apply, okay, what comes first, the chicken and the egg, and what encompasses the most. And that's how I got to be.
Yeah. And I think that that's a great analogy, what came first. All right.
One other factor though on the Joint Commission is to remember that the exam is in theory at least not only acute care hospitals. And even among acute care hospitals, not all of them use the Joint Commission as their accrediting bodies. So that may have been too narrow just on that.
Good point.
That's a good point. That could be a way to weed out that answer as well.
This is why we have Rick here. Okay, I'll take this one.
Take 5. All right.
Okay, what action would you take to ensure that all critical activities associated with care of a patient are being carried out in the right sequence in your organization? A lot of words there. Okay, how would you ensure all critical activities in the right sequence? Oh, I hate putting things in order, right? Okay. Institute clinical practice guidelines. Develop clinical pathways. Institute a disease management program. Or develop an evidence-based management program. And again, I really don't remember the answer to this one. And to me, there's a lot of words, but the key is all critical activities in the right sequence. Okay, so clinical practice guidelines versus clinical pathways. In my mind, I'm conflating the two. Disease management program. I don't, Rick, help me with this. I'm trying to eliminate, and so far I'm just adding.
Yeah, I really don't like this question because I have absolutely no idea where to dig into it. Where I was getting hung up on A and B is institute versus develop. Well, don't you have to develop something and then you implement it? So I'm wondering if that makes a difference on A and B. And I was kind of looking at D as, when it says make sure or ensure that the activities isn't that evidence. So I could make a good argument for all of them.
I know, right?
I think that the idea of pathways as step-by-step processes you're following helps with the word sequence in the question, or at least it connects them.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's misleading me or not.
Yeah, I agree with you, Rick. I think when we look at this question, really the clinical pathway is really intended to create a standard of care for a specific clinical problem, procedure, or episode. So I would choose B as, I think that makes sense to what's being asked.
It looks like we've got some B's going on. Okay.
But is it only the clinical part when it says all critical activities associated with the care of the patient? Does that take it more than clinical?
Well, yeah, I just look at this as like, it gives them a step they needed to complete the procedure. So I look at this as more clinical, yeah.
And I think that keyword care sticks out with that. And I like the word pathways versus guidelines, I think.
Yeah, but plus Rick's comment of carrying out the right sequence, which is kind of embedded in the question, seems to be consistent with a clinical pathway as well.
I'm ready for the answer. What about you guys?
Yeah, let's find a better question after this. I don't like it.
B it is. So that's a great point. Frederick made in software development, we think of it as critical pathways.
There it is. I've seen clinical pathways, you know, later when you like fishbone diagrams and stuff. I've seen the fishbone for pathways as the inputs and sequence. So that's where I went. I was conflating A and B, but as we talked more, it became clearer.
I think that's a great point, you know, when you're taking the test, talking it out to yourself, when you run into that issue.
And if
And
you're
remember, you can always, no, I'm sorry.
no, I would say if you're totally absolutely thrown by a question, as I would have been if I was trying to answer this one, mark it, come back to it later. Don't even think about it when you're doing the other ones. And if all else fails, take a guess. And remember, you don't need 100% to pass.
Right.
See if we can find a better question with 6.
Please.
Ooh, lots of words. Red flag, red flag.
So your medical staff on the general medicine unit has been complaining about the delays in the administration of medications. You study the processing times on other units and indeed find that the general medical unit's times are considerably longer. What would be your first step to take? So A is implement best practices from other units. Well, the only problem with doing that in some cases is it may not translate over directly from medicine units to a tele unit to an ICU unit. Have the manager from the highest performing unit assist the general medical unit in its improvement efforts. Establish benchmarks for processing times across the organization. Organize a process improvement team on the general medical unit. So we're looking at the first step. So you see that there's a discrepancy between the general medical unit and other units. So there definitely is something that needs to be investigated more, and needs to be worked on. So the first step you would take.
I think that's a key thing on the first step, because implementing anything is not your first step.
Yeah.
Bring someone else in to help you is probably not your first step. So I'm going to eliminate and be pretty quickly. And benchmarks is something that comes out of the performance improvement process, not the starting point. So that, I'm going to get to D just by eliminating the first 3 on that first step part of it.
Yeah, that was my thought as well with that, is just, you know, you're going to want to get that unit involved into investigating it, not just implement something from another unit.
Yeah, plus you're gonna have to gather a team that's familiar with the process before you come up with a solution.
Exactly. And that helps eliminate A, because you're not just going to be able to take something and drop it into a unit like that.
The good thing to think about on this one is ready, aim, fire versus ready, fire, aim. And all the other ones about bringing someone in or establishing benchmarks, or you're firing yours, it's part of your solution. But you have to identify what it is you're aiming at first. That's what the team does.
And it looks like some lean process and DMAIC in the chat define the issue. The team who does the work should make the decisions on how to improve their process. That's a great point. You want to make sure you get involvement from the actual team to help with buy-in as well, and being able to implement something and sustain it. So let's see. D it is.
So I hesitate to be bad cop here, but we're running out of time. Finance is its
Okay.
own big section. So
Yeah.
we have more questions, sample questions and answers that we'll be providing out when we send this information out. And to remind you also that flashcards have a whole section on quality and performance management as well.
And the book that Navi recommended really is a good, easy read that covers this stuff in a real thorough way.
That's a great point. Let me skip ahead. Oh, we're seeing all the answers.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
Just don't look.
Yeah, don't look.
Yeah.
So I will hand this over to my co-host Mary to introduce our next guest speaker.
Take myself off. Okay, everyone, quickly. James is here today to cover our finance questions. He has a lengthy experience, Director of Financial Planning and Analysis for KP. Has a Master's of Advanced Studies in Leadership and Healthcare Organizations. He's a CPA and a lecturer at UCSD. Way to go, James. As a UCSD health employee. And he is the co-chair of the Advancement Committee for the Washington State chapter of ACHE. So welcome, James. Thank you so much for spending your Saturday morning with us.
Oh, no, glad to do it, and just happy to be here and take everyone on their journey to prepare for this upcoming exam. So let's we can go to the next slide and get into some of the. So these are the key concepts. The key concepts are embedded in some of the test questions that will follow that we'll discuss. So if we look at this, it touches on financial accounting principles, and these are basically rules and guidelines that companies must follow when reporting their financial data. So we'll get into some basic concepts around revenue, expenses, as well as assets and liabilities. And these are elements that are tracked and documented for inclusion in the balance sheet and income statements that we'll talk about. We'll talk about operating budget principles, and these are consist of all your revenue and expenses for your company that are used in its operations as well. Capital budgeting principles, so important. There's a lot of decision making that occurs on the basis of our cash flows and certainly the timing of those. And it really gets into opportunity costs in terms of where we spend our money. Understanding that we only have a limited amount of funds that we can spend on capital. Reimbursement methodology. We'll talk about the different types of fee-for-service reimbursement methodologies, such as cost-based, charge-based, and of course our prospective payment system. So really interesting concepts around that. Talking about productivity measures were really important in healthcare and measure how productive our providers and support staff are as we track the services they provide to our members. So certainly one of the key concepts in healthcare. We'll talk about financial controls, and these are again policies and procedures, and they're used for organizations to monitor and control their the direct allocation and use of their financial resources. So a lot of key concepts in here that we'll focus on. Next slide. Okay, so we'll talk about the revenue generation. And this is, of course, revenue is mostly earned by rendering our services to our patients. And then there'll be various sources of revenue, certainly from governmental as well as our private payers. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Business model, such a key concept. Whether you're a new or an existing healthcare system, it's important to, when you're offering new products and services, to be able to measure that in a business plan to target your identified market and see what anticipated investment to achieve a return on investment would look like under a business model. So another really important concept here. Certainly financial decision making is important. When we're under a tight economy, companies often begin making decisions to cut costs in order to preserve their profit margins or even their ongoing viability as well. So another key concept. We'll talk about asset management, and that's really the process around organizing, maintaining, and tracking your equipment and supplies and other assets that are used in the healthcare facility. financing, such an important part of what we do in healthcare. And these provide resources and economic incentives for the operation of the health system, and really a key determinant of performance in terms of equity, efficiency, and health outcomes as well. So with that, let's start with the first test question. So I'll, like we've done before, I'll go ahead and read this out real quickly and then give you all an opportunity to provide your best answer in the chat, and then we'll review the question. So this one asks, during the investigation of a merger or acquisition, why would it be prudent for a healthcare executive to obtain advice for someone other than internal legal counsel? So the choices are shown here. A, regular legal counsel may not be objective. B, external legal counsel may have experience in joint ventures. C, external legal counsel has the ability to provide the services in a more economic and timely manner. Or is it D, specialized expertise that's needed in this area? So I'll give everybody a chance to put their best answer in the chat. Seeing a lot of D's here. Okay, so let's review. The regular legal counsel may not be objective. Well, this is maybe true, but I don't think it's a primary reason for obtaining advice from external counsel. So I'm not sure I would choose that one. External counsel may have experience in joint ventures. This is a distractor because if you look at the question, they're asking about merger or acquisition, which is, you know, when we look at this, merger acquisition is a consolidation of companies, where a joint venture is where companies come together to build a contractual arrangement to work, where they work together to achieve a common goal for growth and profit. So it's again, I would eliminate that for just because it's not answering the questions being asked. So I would encourage you, as we talked about before, go back and read the question more than once, read it backwards, just to make sure you understand what questions are being asked. So when you look at your choices, you can quickly eliminate. And then C is saying internal legal counsel has the ability to provide services in a more economic and timely manner. But certainly not more economic. I don't think outside legal counsel would probably be more expensive than internal. So that's the easy one to eliminate as well. So what's left is specialized expertise is needed in this area. And I think that's, quite a few of us chose that as an answer. And this really is about, making the decision to hire outside legal counsel. It really is getting information, exact advice they need and exactly when they need it. So it allows us to really focus on a strategy to get the exact information we need at the time we need it. So I think D is probably our best answer here. Yeah, and I quite a few of you had that answer as well. So great work. But yeah, that again, the key is, reading the question more than once, and then seeing where you can eliminate at least two choices. And some in this particular type of question, a couple of choices was easy to eliminate. So I would encourage you to use some of those test taking strategies.
I'm embarrassed to admit I fell into the trap of reading it quick, not reading it backwards, and settling on B. Because joint ventures, oh, okay, external counsel. Oh yeah, joint ventures. The internal one.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh yeah, no, don't be me.
Yeah, I also missed joint ventures, but what I was going on with B was may have experience. My thought is, well, if they don't have experience, don't hire them.
Exactly. That's a good.
I like D better, but I missed the joint venture part.
Yeah, that's no, but something I didn't mention, but that was another good point by you, Rick. Thank you. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Okay, the ratio of output to input is a measure of A, liquidity, B, process, C, productivity, or D, the work of the environment. So let's see what you all think, and then we'll review it. Seeing a lot of C's there. Okay, so yeah, when they're talking about ratio of output to input, that's doesn't have anything to do with liquidity. That's more, being able to pay your current obligations is coming up. And then, it talks about they're also offering new process, and this is more about measuring specific steps in a process that lead to a positive or negative outcome. So it really doesn't seem to relate back to what's being asked. Certainly productivity, it, really is measuring how efficient a person completes a task. And that seems to be what's being asked here, which I think pretty much everybody got. And then, so that, I think that was, that was more the obvious answer when we look at what's being asked. And then finally, the work of the environment. It's just really that's really more about settings and social aspects and physical condition in a job. So you can quickly eliminate that as a choice as well. So again, it's looking at output to input. When it talks about that, that's usually referring to, productivity. So great work on this one. Okay, let's go to the next question. Okay, a hospital continually assesses the interests of the community and searches for ways to meet these interests can be described as A, predatory, B, market-oriented, C, market-optimized, or D, differentiated. So let's see what everybody thinks. I'll just give everybody a minute to provide their best answer. Seeing some B's coming through. Okay, let's go through the choices. So when it talks about predatory, that really refers to predatory is really a strategy around pricing, and for our goods and services. So it really doesn't seem to relate what's being asked here. So that one you could pretty quickly eliminate. Market oriented, that's really about that's an approach that prioritizes identifying the needs and desires of the consumers and really creating products and services that will satisfy them. So B, which I think a lot of looking at the chat, a lot of people has selected that one. Seems like that would be a good answer what's being asked. But let's look at market optimize. That's more about making adjustments to your marketing efforts based on the goals of your organization. So that one you could probably eliminate pretty quickly. And then finally, D, differentiated. That's more about setting your company apart from the competition through things like distribution or your price point. So I think what's being asked here, I would have chosen B as probably the answer, the most obvious one. Okay, and it seems like a number of you have gotten that as well. So great.
I think that keyword oriented and in the interest of the community, that really kind of aligns with that. And in the chat, they were picking up on that as well.
Yeah, and the only ones I would have struggled between market oriented versus market optimized, but you could like we said, you can eliminate probably two of these choices pretty quickly. And you're really down to just B and C. It's really just understanding those terms to be able to answer this question. So okay, net income as a percent of gross revenues and return on equity are two most important indicators of profitability. A, credit worthiness. B, market strength. C, or cash position. D. See what everybody thinks. And see, it looks like we have some A's coming through. Okay. Let's take a look. So yeah, look at the question. It's talking about net income. It's talking about gross revenues, and then return on equity, which is your net income divided by the equity. So all of this seems to be common in terms of profitability, and really the remaining choices really don't have anything having to do with those components that are in the income statement. Creditworthiness, market strength, or cash position aren't going to really relate to a current operating cycle of net income or revenue. So those you could probably pretty quickly eliminate. I think B and C off the bat, and cash position is really a balance sheet thing. It doesn't really have to do with our income statement or net income. So A sounds like it would probably be the best choice, which sounds like pretty much everyone selected that. So, but let's see what the answer is. And it is A. Great work, and so I'm selecting that one. So let's go on the next one.
So really quick, just to interrupt, that's information that's in the financial management book that's part of the study bundle. And they talk about it in the flashcards.
Thank you, Nora. Okay, so when reviewing assets, which element is the most important indication of an organization's liquidity? And now remember, when we talk liquidity, is how easily we can convert our assets into cash, which should give you a big clue what the answer is here. Yep, we have some C's coming through. Okay, yeah, so the thing is, I think like I think Tara, you put in the chat, that's exactly right. Really, buildings, long-term investments in land and other assets, these are all long-term assets that are not easily converted into cash. Cash and short-term investments represent the most liquid asset we have on our balance sheet. And so C seems like that would be the obvious answer. And great, yep, it is C. So good work. Let's go on the next question. Okay, financial statements are important in order to A, identify, measure, record, and communicate in dollar terms of economic events and status of the organization. Wow, that's a long answer. Or B, serve as a control mechanism for budgeting. C, provide detailed financial information for control at the department level. Or D, provide staffing guidelines to human resource managers. So let's see what everybody thinks. Okay, so yeah, so looking at this, even if you're not sure of the answer, if we review some of these choices, D says provide staffing guidelines to human resource managers. Well, this is information that's independent of your financial statements. So we know we can eliminate that right off the bat. Provide detailed financial information for control at the department level. This information will be in your subsidiary ledger, but it won't be part of your financial statements. So certainly that one can be easily eliminated. B I think, is a distractor, because although it is a part of what the financial statements are used for, it's not a primary use of the financial statements. It's probably a secondary use of it. So B we can eliminate as well, which leads us to A, and to identify, measure, record, and communicate the dollar terms, as this indicates. So that was, I think, the most obvious answer. But again, you can go through process of elimination if you're not sure of the answer to the question, and you're usually left with two choices. Yeah. So, and one thing I would mention is part of, getting through the finance section of the exam. It's really important to really understand a lot of the terms and definitions, as was Tara mentioned in the chat. So that's where the cue cards that Nora showed become really important, especially in the finance section. There's a lot of that going on. So I would just encourage you to, just be familiar with those definitions and terms that are introduced in this section. Okay, next question. So in most cases, the most favorable financial audit opinion that an organization can receive is qualified opinion, adverse opinion, disclaimer of opinion, or unqualified opinion. So let's see what everybody thinks. Looks like we have a little bit of mixed here, but mostly looks like it was D. So let's go through the choices. So when we talk about qualified opinion, really, this is when the auditor's not confident about any specific process or transaction that will prevent them from issuing a clean, what's known as a clean report. So definitely, that would not be favorable, and it's not the type of opinion you want to receive. Adverse opinion, well, that sounds pretty bad to me. And this is when the auditor is not satisfied at all with any of the financial statements and uncover a high level of material misstatement. So it's probably the worst type of opinion you could receive on your financial statement. There's a disclaimer of opinion. That one is that's when an auditor is not offering an opinion at all, and they're trying to distance themselves from providing an opinion and relate to these financial statements. So again, not the type of review you would want to receive from an auditor. And then finally, unqualified opinion. This is again what's considered a clean report, and this does represent what auditors most often give to companies and what a company would expect to receive based on their audit. So I think here D is probably our best answer. And it is D.
It's kind of weird because unqualified seems to have a negative connotation, but then when you contrast it to what opinion is.
Yeah, you just have to understand that under a qualified opinion, they're mentioning things they've uncovered as part of the audit, so they have to put it back in the report when they issue the audit. So I think that's a difference. Unqualified, they're not really mentioning anything. They're saying it's free of any material misstatement. So I think that's the difference between A and D. But you're right, it's it's not real clear based on the wording that's shown here. But again, if you look at this question, you can eliminate two off the bat. Adverse sounds bad, and it certainly is. And disclaimer, they're not offering an opinion at all. They're trying to distance themselves from the audit. So so B and C could be eliminated pretty quickly. You're really just left with those two choices. And it's really about, again, understanding these terms and what they mean. Okay. The purpose, this one reads, the purpose of the statement of operations or income statement is to A, present the position of the organization at a specific point in time. B, present the reasons that assets change from one period to another. C, present cash receipts and where they came from and cash versus where they went to during an accounting period. Or is this D, present operating results of an organization over a period of time? So let everybody put their best answer. We'll go over it. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of D's in the chat here. So this one is they give you a clue in these answers and what's being asked. So in the question, they're asking a statement of operations, and you see D, they're mentioning operating results. So that gives you a pretty big clue on what the answer to the question is. And they're really testing your ability to understand the different types of financial statements in this question. But if you knew nothing, you didn't understand any of the terms and the definitions, you could still answer this question because they're telling you, they're asking about a statement of operations, and D's asking about operating results of an organization. The other part of this is when they talk about a period of time versus point in time always refers to a balance sheet. A period of time always refers to an income statement. So that's another clue that would help you to answer this question. But for the A is really your balance sheet because it's talking about financial position at a specific point in time, and that definitely doesn't define your operating results. The net assets, that's just your statement of change in stockholders' equity, another financial statement, but again, nothing to do with what's being asked. And it mentions cash receipts and disbursements. Well, that's your cash flow statement. So again, it's really understanding what these financial statements are and what they represent, but there always is, a ways to eliminate the choices you're given, and then there are clues embedded in the answers that they're providing. So just a little test techniques you can go through as you try to answer these questions. Let's go to the next one. So the ratios that measure an organization's long-term liquidity are called A, liquidity ratios, B, profitability ratios, C, capital structure ratios, or D, efficiency ratios. Let's see what everybody thinks. This one's a little bit more challenging question because it's really understanding your knowledge behind these terms and what they mean.
Yeah, it's a trick question.
Yeah. So let me go through it with everyone just to see if this will help a little bit. So when we talk about liquidity ratios, this is really is about a company's ability to pay its upcoming or short-term debt obligations. So, and then the question's asking about long-term. So definitely would not be A. Profitability ratios are basically financial metrics that are used to assess the business's ability to generate earnings relative to its revenue and operating cost. So when we think about long-term liquidity, we're probably not focusing on that either. profitability ratio is more about what's happening in your current operating cycle. Now, C, capital structure ratio, this could also be known as leverage ratios. So it might throw those terms out, but these are basically capital structure ratios that are those that they're basically financial ratios that measure the firm's long-term stability and structure. But if this will help you remember, all it is taking your total liabilities divided by your total equity. But again, it's a measurement of the long-term structure of the stability of your company. So I think C seems to fit well best with what's being asked. And then the last one, the efficiency ratios. These things really are measuring how efficiently your company uses its assets to generate revenues and its ability to manage those assets. So really D is not really anything to do with long-term liquidity. So I'll probably limit that as well. So I think, understanding the definitions again behind these, probably C is probably our best answer. Yep.
I'm
Anybody?
holding up the flashcards to show that there are definitions.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Nora, again. Any questions before we move on to this from this? Okay. Next question. The purpose of a strategic financial plan is that looking at this is A, is it looking 10 years, future 10 years, determine what the business will look like? Is it B, translate strategic plan into next year's objective? Or C, convert operating plan into monetary terms? Or is it D, identify resources that will be necessary to accomplish the strategic plan? Let's see what everybody thinks about this. Okay, so let's review this one as well. It's may not be as straightforward, but they do provide they talk about a strategic financial plan in the question, and you notice in the answer D, it's talking about a strategic plan. So that seems to, without understanding anything beyond the strategic plan, it seems to give you a pretty good clue what the answer may be. But so really understanding the strategic financial plan is really about what direction your business is heading and why. So financial plan strategies for your business can help you determine where you spend your money, time, and your other resources. And it's about really setting goals for your business and developing a plan to achieve them. And also taking a step back from your day-to-day operation and asking where your business is headed and what its priorities should be. So I think with that, I would have chosen A because that was more about so that on A, it's really what you want to do is ensure the organization's following your strategic plan to attain both a short and a long-term goal to maximize shareholder value. So I wouldn't have chosen A. B, it's again translating strategic plan in next year's objectives. Again, what we talked about, we're taking a step back from your day-to-day operation and asking where your business is headed and what its priority should be. So definitely eliminate B. C says convert operating plan into monetary terms. Not really. It's more about setting overall goals for your business. So here, I think D is the obvious choice around when it talks about strategic plan. So it's really about your financial plan strategies for your business and really determine where your resources and money and time is spent. So yeah, so D was pretty odd, but it does help you because it gives you some sort of clue in the answer as well. Okay. This one's asked about zero-based plan or budget, and it gives you a choice. You can see the choices down below. They're described. I And you noticed, you know, on the answers giving, when we talk about a zero-based plan, you know, think about what that means, and then look at the answers and see what best describes that. So I'll give you all a chance to read through that and see what you think. Yeah, I've seen a lot of A's. Yeah, I mean, a zero-based plan is you're really starting from scratch, right? And you're starting to build the budget from the ground up without, any any historical information, not, without rolling for your last year's budget, which all these other answers, B, C, and D are. B and C, B is really using your current year results and and some of your metrics. C is basically rolling forward your budget from prior year to current year. So, those it can be easily eliminated. And then D really doesn't have anything to do with zero-based budgeting. So an A is, I think, even if you didn't know what a zero-based plan is, it seems to give you pretty clear indication from the choices that are given here. So A, I think, is probably the best answer. Okay, let's go to the next one. So managed care plans that exert the most control over providers and therefore save the most money in provider payments are. So they provide A, indemnity plans, B is PPO, C, HMO, and then D, point of service. Let's see what everybody thinks. And just remember, read the question and make sure we read the question a couple of times to just make sure to understand what's being asked. And they're giving you a clue. They're exerting the most control over providers, and they're saving the most money.
Someone that works in the insurance industry, I hate the way that question's worded, but
Yeah,
it gets the point across.
yeah. Yeah, it's it is when you read through it, I had to read through it a few times to get this one, but really, if you look at this, the indemnity plans, they're not going through any network, right? They're just paying a percentage of what's customary and reasonable in terms of charges. PPO, they still go through a network, but then they go outside the network if they choose. Same thing with point of service as well. It has some restrictions, but again, you're paying a higher cost if you go outside the network with the option of doing so. So really, HMO is the most restriction because you're having to go through the network providers. So it's more restricted than these other plans, which are a little bit more flexible. Well, I think most of you all got that. Okay, so the last question, a productivity measure that takes into account the level of skill required to accomplish the task is A, hourly rate, B, paid hours per unit of service, C, scheduled hours per unit of service, or D, labor compensation per unit of service. See what everybody thinks. Yep, seeing a lot of D's here. Okay, yeah, so this question, going through it, so both A and B is the information you need to answer this question, but by themselves, they'll provide all the information that would address the question around the productivity measure that also takes into account the level of skill required. So they're talking about productivity, and they're talking about the level of skill required to produce 1 unit of service. So you need the hourly rate, you need the paid hours per unit of service, you need kind of both of those things. Schedule hour per unit of service, you can eliminate that. You want the actual hours. Um, and then really labor compensation per unit of service, it really takes it has components of A and B. So it's your, when you look at this, it's looking at the hourly rate of the employee completing service. Really it's about how much a business pays its worker to produce 1 unit of output. So it's taking compensation per hour and it's dividing that into the output on a per hour basis. So, and you can see how both A and B are used as part of that. But that essentially here is I think our best answer. Any questions? Other questions that we went through so far on the presentation?
James, I wanted to ask a question.
Yeah.
Finance is obviously a big area, and it's one that probably terrifies people more than any other one. What are the key areas to focus on? I think what I was thinking as you went through stuff was knowing ratios, or at least being able to classify the different types of ratios.
Yeah.
Knowing the different financial statements. What else?
I think it's just understanding the some of the terms and definitions that are thrown out there. So if we it talks about productivity measure, which is more of an operational thing, but certainly has a labor component. So I think productivity, a measurement of productivity is important. I think really understanding the like you said, the different types of financial statements. And then they're throwing a lot of terms, like when we went through the different types of audit opinions are given, I would make sure I would definitely understand that between qualified, unqualified, adverse, all that.
So to study, maybe as you read, identify key terms and make your own glossary if needed.
Yeah, exactly. It's really about looking at, and I think in the presentation, if you go down another slide, there's a glossary of terms.
Oh, there we go. Yep.
That will be helpful for you to understand, because even the questions themselves, they're taking pieces out of the financial statements and they're throwing that into a question, such as like return on equity. I think one of the questions had, and it mentioned revenue and profitability, and you just have to understand. You have to make sure you understand that that's associated with an income statement. So it really understands some of those terms and definitions that I would focus on in terms of answer these questions. So a lot of that is I think will go a long way to prepare you for this section of the exam.
There's a question about math calculations. Like, would you have to calculate any of the ratios or anything like that?
I don't. I have not seen any question that would require you to do that. Not saying it couldn't be on the test, but I've not seen anything at this point based on my years of prepping people for this exam. So I don't think so. I think it's more understanding the concepts behind what's given in terms of the ratios. Just understanding what it represents and what it's trying to measure are some of the key things.
Brian, do you recall any even just simple math ratio questions?
I was trying to remember. I don't remember doing any math. It was more about the definitions of what the ratios meant versus trying to calculate them yourself.
Yeah, I would even when it talks about the even beyond the I guess the ratios are shown here, just understand the purpose of why they're trying to measure it. It's not just about the ratio, but what they're trying to measure. And you can see it here. Some of this is days cash on hand, so that just understand some of the theories and concepts behind the ratios that are given. That will help kind of answering some of these questions. Like the current ratio, the acid test ratio, you're just trying to measure your ability to in terms of turnover these assets and for your inventory or receivable. So just those type of things. Because I don't, like I said, I don't believe at least that you'll have to do any calculations, but just really to understand the theory behind it.
I do recall at one point hearing like in the HR section, there was something about calculating number of FTEs given a staffing ratio or something. But the key is something you could do by hand, and you've got paper there.
Yeah.
It's not something you'll need a calculator for.
Yeah, they do give you the scratch paper and a pencil to jot a few things down. I don't remember having to calculate anything. I may have just been lucky when I took the test and I didn't get one of those questions. But I think
Yeah.
it's mostly about memorization for the finance piece.
Right. Yeah. And more specifically, it's more about the concepts because like one of the questions I think went through, we had identified long-term, what are the things that impact long-term liquidity, and you really had to understand how do we measure that, what things are used in measuring that. So you don't have to necessarily understand what the ratio is, but maybe what the definition behind that ratio represents, and that's really what you need to answer the questions that are given.
You just point out the matrix up here is just a sample, and
Yeah.
this is a good study technique for you, is just identify the ratios, come up with a quick one-sentence definition, and then classify it into the different areas to
Exactly.
familiar with all of them.
Yeah, and then the flashcards that Nora showed also very helpful, I think for the finance section, because it seems like a lot of that's what the finance is based on, at least the questions I've seen.
So the assignment for this group is when you do take the exams, let us know if there were any math equations that you needed to calculate. This is how you pay it forward.
I know we're at time. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, James, for taking the time to help us work through finance. I know that's a tough one for a lot of us. But again, thank you all, and we will see you next Saturday.
Thank you.
Thanks all. I really appreciate your participation.
James.
Bye now.
Bye.